Hello everyone, welcome to the Werk podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Laura Chung.
And I am Brittany Simone Anderson.
Thank you so much for being here. We just wanted to start off this series by introducing ourselves, how we met, our stories. And I guess I should start off by saying that I'm so grateful, first of all, that I'm getting to do this project with one of my bestest friends, my soul sisters. We met through cacao circles at the assemblage when it was here in New York City. And we had a very spiritual encounter and we kept in touch, and we really bonded through our related stories around being a person of color, woman of color in spiritual spaces. And over the course of, I guess, gosh, it's like a year and a half we've been friends. Such a short amount of time. But
yeah, really.
But this is really our love letter to the collective, to our communities, and this is our intention for this podcast, is just to bring about awareness more than anything. So I think I want to first start by asking you, Britt, just some of your experiences being a yoga teacher in New York City.
Oh, wow. That question is so layered. Before I start, I also just want to say thank you, because this is a beautiful thing to co-create, and this comes from our heart, which is really incredible. And it's incredible to find someone that you align with and you share frequency with, who is also creating the time and the space to make the change in the same way you are. So thank you for embarking on this journey with me. It's an honor. As for my experiences as a teacher of color, in New York, specifically working in wellness spaces, you know, it's interesting because it's really layered. Without going too far forward and back, sort of starting somewhere in the beginning, I guess. After I'd been a teacher for a while, one of my dear friends who I went to yoga school with, who's also a woman of color actually, did a reading for me, and she's deeply connected to tarot cards. And at some point she pulls a card, I don't remember what the card was, and she says, you think that being a person of color holds you back a bit in this space, but it's actually your superpower. And I was like, okay. And I just sort of took that in, and it really echoes with me every time we step into this space to do an interview and to do the work, this podcast, because she's right, it is our superpower. It's one of the things that we've been told creates limitations, and in a lot of ways it does, but we are now in a space where we all are equipped with these sort of proverbial hammers to break through the glass ceilings, right? We can see the ceiling. It's no longer something invisible. It's clear. We can see what is accessible to us. So now we need to break through in order to achieve it and allow more space for future generations. As a person of color in the wellness space, teaching yoga is layered. You learn to teach, you teach classes, you wonder oftentimes if you're not getting as many students as your white counterparts. The reason why would be because you're a person of color. You doubt yourself, you suffer with imposter syndrome, you work really hard. And I'm saying you, but this is my story. I worked really hard to be the best teacher I could be. We seek recognition, and we seek to achieve the same things that our white counterparts do, and oftentimes we don't, and it's incredibly frustrating. So that no matter how smart and good at and natural at what we're doing is, it oftentimes feels like we're not necessarily making the same strides or accomplishing the same goals as our white counterparts who are less educated or less interested or less natural at it. And it makes you scratch your head. And I've had that experience and have really worked on seeing myself and acknowledging my own self-worth and acknowledging my own ability to lead and hold space and trust it in myself and push myself, and eventually begun to make strides. But at some point there's a lot of self-doubt, and it's very challenging, and it's, as we all have heard the phrase, and it's a phrase that I don't know if all people of color or if just Black people are told as a child that you have to work twice as hard or 3 times as hard to get half as much. And so understanding that's sort of the way I've stepped into this space. And I've worked 3 times as hard. But a part of this is now taking what I deserve. If that answers your question. That was so layered and so long.
I know it's kind of a vague question to encompass all of your years of experiences and all of the layers of, your triumphs and your tribulations. But we had to start somewhere. So.
What about you?
Well, I would say that, I came from a corporate background. I worked in private equity in New York City and had a very, it wasn't a 9 to 5, it was more like 24/7 kind of job. So I went from an industry where you had to prove yourself because there were generations of like legacy kids who went to Harvard and Yale, and they kind of get funneled into this, private equity system where, their fathers are in, like legacy kids, right? And for a person of color, and at the time when I first started that job, I was one of the only people of color in an office of 60 until it expanded. And I honestly think I got in because of my personality, but that's a story for another day. And then coming into spirituality and wellness, when I started that journey, I thought, I finally found my space where I could be myself, I can be my authentic self, only to experience gaslighting and racism at the peak of, it wasn't even, a quiet experience. It was very outward by a white woman in spirituality. And I've spoken about this story many times, and I don't necessarily want to get back into it, but it was just so shocking at how just speaking out about privilege and racism was so violent in a spiritual and wellness space, where really what spiritual and wellness meant for me at the time was just being yourself and being seen and feeling safe. And then I realized, okay, this is just like every other industry. And the good thing that came out of that, though, was that I started my own platform. I started my own podcast, Awaken and Align, and I realized, wow, there's so much work to be done specifically in this space, because for us people of color, spirituality and wellness is for survival. It's for community. It's for feeling safe. And I think for most white people or people with power and privilege, it's more a commodity. It's more of a luxury kind of thing. So I saw very quickly the kind of, shadow side of spirituality when I got into it.
I love that you touched on legacy and stepping into spaces where most of the people that you are around who are white presenting maybe got there because of who their family is, because there's the implied generational wealth factor that in wellness spaces allows you to be a yoga teacher and just that, or a Reiki practitioner and sign up for all the courses that are thousands of dollars, right? There's so much to this that makes it challenging to step into a wellness or spiritual space and hold the space without allowing your own background stuff to come up, without the creeping fear that lives in the back of your brain on, I have to achieve this many classes and have this many students or get this many privates. I have to say yes to every opportunity, whether it suits me or not, because I have to pay my bills. That doesn't exist if you are already cared for, if you have cushion, if you have support, if you have connection to people in power, so that you can do this. And then all of a sudden you're collecting privates here and there and you're making exponentially more money. All of these things feed into and white supremacy and our patriarchal system really feeds into the challenges that people of color face when stepping into these spaces and really holding these spaces authentically.
Yeah, and also just from my personal experience, I'm the only one in my whole entire family besides I have one cousin who's a DJ, which is like so unheard of in the Korean family, but we're the only ones that are doing what we truly love and have kind of veered away from the traditional, you know, Korean expectations or Asian expectations. And so a lot of my journey has been very, very lonely, and I wasn't able to even share with my parents like how difficult it is to be an entrepreneur and how there's so much shadow work and imposter syndrome involved in that journey. And I think that is why a lot of us, especially when you're coming from a more traditional space, to have community to support you and to truly understand like what it means to be an entrepreneur, but also stepping out of, you know, the legacy of your own culture and what it expects from you. So I think that's also why I was craving community and just people who understood me at a very spiritual, soulful level. And, you know, to some extent, I'm still craving that. Like, I'm still searching for that because, yes, I founded that for my people, but I also want to be taken care of as well. Like, I also want to step into a space where I'm seen and heard and valued and felt safe, and I don't necessarily have to go through my whole entire like origin story of like how my trauma and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, like, I don't know if anybody's listening to this being like, I feel so lonely. It's because, yes, you might feel lonely because maybe there's people that you grew up with or that you live with who don't, you know, share the same like viewpoints on life. Mm-hmm. Which we always talk about. We always talk about trying to find community that's both spiritual but also grounded into this reality.
Yes, and I feel like there's almost this switch that happens that we click, right, or flip, mm-hmm. When we step into a spiritual space that we feel that we need to embody all of the aspects that align with that spiritual space, that don't necessarily align with the here and now, right? So, you know, you hear this a lot when when yogis talk about going vegan, right? And there's mention of like ahimsa in this practice of non-harming, which mm-hmm. is like one of the first sort of commandments of the Yoga Sutra, not the Yoga Sutras, of the yoga practice as a whole, right? Is non-harming, and so, or non-violence. And so we look at it like if we were to truly embody that, then we must be vegan. There's actually an episode of the Yoga is Dead podcast where they talk about it, and it's called Vegans Killed Yoga. Mm-hmm. It's great, check that out. But, you know, it's just, we feel like we have to embody what we feel or what we're told a certain spiritual belief or collection of beliefs mean, to the point where we lose touch with reality. Mm-hmm. And that's harmful. It's harmful for us and it's harmful for the collective, because then we begin to erase everyone's experiences based on our subjective experience. Mm-hmm. And so that's what this is really here to remind us, that my experience isn't your experience, but both experiences can exist mutually, and both deserve space to be heard, mm-hmm. and a space to be honored and acknowledged and to support.
Yeah. I'm so curious. I mean, I feel like we talk about this a lot, but what made you want to start this podcast or say yes or...
Such good questions. What made me want to start this podcast? Just like what you were saying before, that we both have a community that intersects and that exists separately, that is spiritual, and we're coming out of the hot mess that, I don't know if I can curse in this podcast.
Yeah.
The hot fuckery that was the QAnon, the rising and not demise, because I'm pretty sure it still exists, but the quieting of QAnon, and just how harmful that was, and how so many friends and loved ones and colleagues and people in our community that we thought had our back and shared in our desire, who will still yell Black Lives Matter, right? But will also vote for Trump because for some reason they believe him to be the rising of the I don't even know, he's supposed to be some sort of savior, right?
The light worker.
The light worker, which is another Messiah complex, which is just, oh my gosh, eating us alive. But it's realizing that my community was very ignorant. And ignorance isn't the crime, it's just the choice to remain ignorant is what's harmful. Mm-hmm. And the choice to ignore what is in order to feed some very personal need. That's what's harmful. Mm-hmm. But us being surrounded by people that just didn't know and didn't want to know and would choose to believe what feels fun and free and cool over acknowledging and protecting my experience and my body. That's why I started this podcast, because I wanted to create a space for people to learn, to unlearn, to continue to process and do the work, and to feel safe asking questions and not feel accused.
Do you feel in some way that, BLM has been a movement for a long time, but there was something about it happening last year where we were all inside and we all were forced to look at it because we weren't distracted by our jobs and, being out in the world. Do you feel like there was something about last year in particular that also made more people aware and in a way made you more ignited in your confidence of like, this is something I need to speak out about?
I think that the rise and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and the attention that the world paid to it this time versus, at the death of Eric Garner, which there was a huge march in New York years ago, and things that people of color have been speaking on about for a while. But this was different because the world, like you said, was stuck inside and they had to pay attention. And then there was such a divide where if you weren't speaking out against the violence against Black and brown bodies, and you weren't actively at least appearing anti-racist, then you were racist, right? So there became this very polarizing shift between who you are and what you stand for and not. And so it became cool, right? Businesses are now speaking out about it consistently in posts, right? Not just one random post during February, right? But like this consistent. And I think that created the space for people that triggered, it ignited something inside people who genuinely wanted the world to be beautiful, or wanted to live in a world that they thought they lived in, where racism doesn't exist and where prejudice doesn't exist. It created a space for them to be more willing to listen. And I think that's what made this time different. But again, we know that these movements have been happening forever. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even specifically with what happened with the Asian American community in America, over the past year, I mean, it became either you speak out against it or you're a monster. Mm-hmm. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, where do I even begin? Well, yes, like we have to give everybody, I was actually going to ask you, like, how much grace period do you give people, because I feel that, and you know how I feel about this, like we live in the digital age and there's Google, which is free 99, and there's like all of these educators and books out there, and it's in our zeitgeist. It's like people say on radio, podcast, TV about the words white supremacy and racism and being anti-racist. So if at this point you don't actively search and research and learn and unlearn, then you are part of the problem, in my personal opinion, which is right. Let's just be honest. Just kidding, but not kidding. And you're kind of like, I'd like to say like raw dogging it. Like you're gonna just keep going about life and then you're going to be called out at some point by your unconscious behavior, which we've been seeing a lot happening to people that we know. And so I think that if you are not actively learning about it and unlearning your unconscious biases, then you are creating some form of harm, or you're at least perpetuating it. So like when the whole Asian thing happened, which has been happening for forever, my parents I would be so worried about them, and they'd be like, Laura, this has been happening since we moved to this country. You know, it's just something that's always been there, but now everyone's seeing it, you know? And I have a couple of white friends who just really have no idea what it means to be a person of color. And I was walking around Manhattan the other day, and 2 different occasions I was being followed and solicited by men, and my friends would be like, what the hell, that's so shady. And I'm like, yes, because Asian women are fetishized, is that a word? Fetishized and almost like preyed upon. And it's like, that's just my everyday experience. I have to be wary of what I wear. I have to be wary of like having protection, planning out how I'm gonna get around, and always being on guard about my body. And that's just the regular experience for women of color. And I don't know, and maybe even women in general, but I don't know that many other, maybe like white women and white people get that.
You know, it's so funny you bring that up, because as you're saying this, I had a flashback to when I lived in Harlem, and I had one of my roommates was white, and she was like, she's fairly woke. She was like a cool girl, and we were walking, and I would tell her about some of the experiences that I've had since I was like 12, right, or 11, with like grown men just being despicable, and seeing my body as not even as a commodity, as a thing, as something that they can, as an object, right, that they have a right to, and being spoken to in a way, and being looked at in a way, and you just know it, and it's like super uncomfortable. And all women experience this. This is not a race thing, but specifically people of color are thought to be and oftentimes by men of color, to be more available in their bodies, to be more available. And because of the history between Black and brown men and white women, and the violence that Black and brown men experience for speaking to white women in a certain way, that behavior is less prevalent between these men and these women, so that Black and brown men and men of color are more inclined to speak in a derogatory manner to other women of color and not to white women. And walking with my friend who's white, we walked from West Harlem to East Harlem, lots of different ethnic groups in between, and she was in awe because she didn't receive the same attention. We're walking side by side, and both our clothes are acceptable, right? No one's dressed, and just the amount of really lewd behavior that was thrust upon me, and the amount of respect she received were like night and day.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So right. It's crazy.
Yeah, and to your point, I was with 2 white women, and you know, Nisa, like, but she could maybe pass for being white, so it was just me.
Yes.
Just me.
Yes. And in the Black community, this is called misogynoir, right? This is the misogyny that's specific to Black and brown bodies, and it's deep. It's something that you should look up. If you're listening to this now and you haven't heard of this, look it up. It's very layered, and it's a touchy subject in our communities, right? But it still exists. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and because just because, you know, they're Black men or brown men that are doing that, there are so many different layers of power and privilege. There's like an intersection of it, which I just learned all about this in the last year, because as an Asian American woman, I hold certain levels of privilege, but am oppressed in other areas. So
we look at and we talk about wellness and spirituality, and then we look at the ways with which our communities protect our men, because they also experience a lot of oppression. We see this, we talk about this a lot in our communities, because we see the ways that our women need to protect our men, because our men are subject to a whole nother layer of oppression and psychological warfare at the hands of our patriarchal system and white supremacy. But that often creates space where we make excuses for bad behavior. Without getting too off topic, this makes me think of the way Felicia Rashad, who love her, but like defends Bill Cosby, you know? And it's,
that's a good example.
Right? And it's like there's almost this there's this choice to turn your head and not look at the behavior that's damaging, because we don't want to add to the harm, right? And that speaks to the layers of all of our experiences and how we have to create wellness spaces for people that look like us and have these conversations, right?
Yeah.
Because we need it exponentially more.
Yeah. So when you do come across somebody who's saying something harmful or racist in these spaces, particularly by white people, how do you handle that? I mean, I've personally experienced you handling that, but but I would love to hear you.
My mom did not raise me to be a quiet person, and she is not quiet either. And so to speak out against harm is a part of my DNA. I come from a lot of very vocal women who are not easily subdued and choose to take charge and control of our situations. And so no matter the harm, be it white supremacy, be it hatred and
anything,
rhetoric towards the LGBTQIA plus community, whatever it is, right? I will not keep my mouth shut. I don't care who it's from. I will tell you you're loud and wrong and you need to quiet down. And so that's my experience with these kinds of things. In these spaces where I hear something, there's sometimes, I just was learning about this the other day, that shock factor that I'm sure everyone has where something is heard or something is said that is so harmful but also very surprising that you don't react.
Yes.
And then later you're like, damn it.
Yes, that happens a lot. Because you just can't believe your ears. You're just like, what?
This is supposed to be a safe space, and then you just don't react appropriately, and then your mind goes to all the things. Maybe they didn't mean it. Wait, what? They don't know what they said. The uncomfortable laughter, right? That we all know so well.
Yeah.
But if I have my wits about me and I'm on guard, I will definitely correct the behavior, and I'm working on not responding so emotionally, but instead just being very clear. And there's a really interesting push and pull, finding that balance. You're not quiet either, though.
No, I'm not, but I found that, well, first of all, sometimes I do take into consideration, like, the space that I'm in, and this is going to disturb the space, clearly, because I have not worked on not being emotional about it. And I know it's gonna make people feel uncomfortable, so I sometimes like weigh, is this worth that like disruption in the energy of the space, or is it worth it? And that is why I'm very particular now of the spaces that I go into, because I don't want to have to do that all the time, you know. And I felt for a little while, even something as simple as like a yoga class where the teacher is white and it's very much based on just like body, you know, fitness, instead of just what I feel like yoga is meant for is really like moving stress and moving the energy out of your body. It's like, do I correct her or do I just let it go? And you know, I like definitely weigh the options now, but yeah, I'm usually not quiet about it.
You know, I don't think that we're meant to be. I think that that's part of our work, is to educate people, because oftentimes people don't know how harmful what they're saying is. You know, it's so touchy too, because you're right. It's like, do I disturb the space? But you've been disturbed, right? We've been disturbed. Now we feel unsafe.
Yeah.
You know, I'm curious if after you've chosen not to disturb the space, if later you wonder if that was the right way to handle it, right? Or vice versa.
Well, so we've interviewed all of our guests for the first season, and something that Mujer Medicine, Mary Lou said really woke me up, because I had the same like question for her about calling out, calling forward, calling in, whatever you want to call it, to, you know, people who are saying harmful, shitty fucking things. And she said that by remaining silent, that's perpetuating colonization and perpetuating these harmful things. And so when I look back at all the moments I did choose to stay silent, that, yeah, I do regret it, because that person is never going to know what they said was actually harmful. But, you know, I can only change my efforts going forward. But, yeah, it's tricky, because, again, like, these conversations are so nuanced and multi-layered that I'd rather have these conversations, like, on the phone or face-to-face, and also not through, you know, a group chat or on social media.
Do you feel that this is why people of color need safe spaces, or do you feel that creating these spaces that are specific for women of color, people of color, or for women, do you feel that that's in some way divisive?
So I'm gonna give you two answers. The first one is very petty.
Give it to me. Give me all the pettiness.
I feel like if you're a white person or a white passing person and you're not creating a safe space, then fuck you. Like, we deserve to have our own safe spaces, and that is just the repercussion. That's just the consequence of not holding those safe spaces. And if, again, this is very petty and mean girlish, but then you're losing all the flavor and the spice of your circles, and it's just gonna be white people talking to white people. My second answer is, at some point though, we're all going to have to, like, integrate and not have these echo chambers of just talking to each other and people who look like us, because ultimately I do believe in a world where we can all come together and share experiences, but until certain white people recognize their harmful ways, then it's not our job to create that space for them.
This is where education comes into play, right?
Yes.
And also the work, right? So that as our white counterparts are educating themselves and learning, they begin to understand that people of color do require safe spaces, safe for microaggression, safe for feeling like the other, right? I was talking to my dad about this because he comes from a generation that doesn't have the language for all of these things. So he was saying to me when I was home the other day that he's so fed up with indescriptions of things. Men are just called men. White men are just called men. But if they're not white, then they are black, or they are Hispanic, or they are, right, they're given some sort of physically identifying marker, which makes them not norm, right? And if they're not the norm, then there's something wrong with them. They're different, they're othered. That's a microaggression, right? So that, yes, it's a way of describing someone, but you only need to add that factor in if it's necessary, you know, or you add that factor in for everyone. But understanding these, like, tiny little ways that we create division on a regular basis is the best way for our allies and our friends and just the world at large to do a better job. And I was reading this book, which is one of my favorites. It's a restorative yoga for...
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. For ethnic and race-based stress and trauma by Gail Parker. And she talks about why it feels divisive for many times for white people and white presenting people to talk about race and racism, and it's because it's not a norm for them. They are the norm. And so understanding that if everything you do is normal, then when you talk about something that is harmful, it makes you feel like there's something wrong with you, which is the person of color experience, the BIPOC experience.
Yeah. Something that, I don't want to give all of it away, but I've learned so much from all of our conversations. And something that Michelle Johnson said that really stuck with me is that white people just need to build resilience, like a muscle, right? Because epigenetically they haven't had to deal with the same trauma and the same intergenerational trauma that people of color have. And so I really believe that, again, it's their job to build that resilience and to build that muscle of being really uncomfortable. Because we were just talking about this today, like when you don't know, you don't know. And so there's a grace period, right, of accepting that everyone wakes up in their own time, but then you have to do something about it.
What's the grace period of your friends?
It's been 30 years, so I feel like the clock is ticking.
Right.
Just kidding.
You know, that's the thing though, right? It's like, how long can your friends stay silent, and like whether they reach out to you personally or they begin to speak out against the violence, be it verbal or physical or psychological, etc., spiritual, right? There's only so long that your friends can be quiet, that our friends can be quiet, before that's its own violence, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's what part of this is.
Totally.
It's just a little like nudge, it's now time for you to do your part and build that resiliency.
Because I feel like for me in the last year and a half, that is what marks a good friendship is like, listen, it's an inside job. Like, I have to do my own work, but if you are not showing up, understanding where I'm coming from and what it takes to have my lived experiences, because again, we are centered in a white world, and we've seen and heard and listened to white stories. And so I've been in the white world and literally grew up in a white neighborhood, went to a very white school and white industry. And so now, like, get off your fucking high horse and for 1 second understand what it's like to be in my shoes. That's all I'm asking.
Not asking for the world at all.
No.
I just watched this beautiful talk from this incredible teacher. I can't remember her name, but I'll include it below in the talk because I have the link somewhere. Where she's a professor and she's talking about one of the reasons why it's so challenging for white-bodied people, white-presenting people, to understand and see people of color and their plight, and then work to change something within themselves. And if you look back historically, you see that there was a war that happened where white bodies and white brains, right, and white psychology was taught to see people of color as less than human, and like less than, and she used the example the opening example in the talk, that if she kicked a puppy or harmed a puppy, that you would have to, like, if she killed a puppy on stage, there would have to be some like therapy that would have to happen. But then she showed pictures of like people participating in lynchings, and you see all of these people and children, right? What does that do to your brain and your psychology, and how do you carry that into future generations? And so this is like, okay, we now understand and see you, and you still have to do the work. You have so much work to do, right? And that's okay. That's the discomfort. That's how you build the resiliency.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that discomfort, you're not gonna make it. You gotta, like, you're not gonna make it. You know, you gotta, like, you know, that's how you build it, because eventually the world's gonna move on without you.
Yeah.
You know.
But also, you have power and privilege, so do something with it. You have the ability.
What a gift.
What a gift. That's what I'm
You
saying.
know?
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, this is why I don't understand, like, the mind of a white person, because, like, just admit and acknowledge that you have all of this power and this privilege, but you have power and privilege.
The
so
mainstream white person.
Exactly. And then you can do something about it. And, you know, like I said in the beginning, I have levels of privilege as somebody who grew up in the suburbs, and, you know, all the list of things. I'm able-bodied, I'm cisgender. And with that, I try to do my best to help people who are marginalized in other areas and share their stories, and, you know, educate myself on what it even means to be privileged in those ways. And I think that's all you have to do is acknowledge it. It really pisses me off when it's like, I don't have privilege. I'm like, oh no.
When did you realize that there was a huge disparity that was greater than you can ever imagine.
Disparity between what?
Races.
You mean being Asian versus Black?
Versus anything.
Interesting. I think growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, I always knew that I was different. I was always shown that I was different. Sorry, I have to pause this because it's not like picking up. Now it's picking up.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello.
Hello? Oh, there we go.
Hello? Hello, hello, hello?
Okay.
Is it picking me up too, though?
Yeah. See, this is you, 3, and this is me, 1. Hello. And you don't want it to go over 12, because then it's gonna like break. Okay, yeah.
Should keep that part in.
So growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, I always felt other and have definitely experienced some racist remarks about being Asian. So I definitely knew that I was different, and you know, we ate different kinds of food that didn't look like a regular PB&J. And then we didn't grow up with a lot of Black people or Hispanic people around. So it wasn't until, actually, I really hate to admit this, but in 2018, when I was called out by a Black woman, who I interviewed, Solange, who I love, who called me out for my level of privilege, that I looked at that and I was like, I wonder what she means, and did my own research. And it wasn't until I did my own decolonization work and looked at the ways in which I was privileged. Yes, I have immigrant parents. Yes, I'm Asian American. Yes, I'm a woman, but I also benefit from certain levels of privilege, even levels of privilege that I'm learning about today, that I was like, that's privilege? What? That it wasn't up until then that I started having different friends, like beyond just white and Asian. Like I have Black friends now, I have non-binary friends now, I have like different kinds of friends. So again, it was just like being curious and like looking at myself and asking myself these questions. Did that answer your question?
That really did.
Okay.
It did. So when I asked the question and when I thought about it, there we go. When I asked the question and you began to respond, it brought up a memory, 2 memories for me. And the first was when I was in school, and I've always, again, like you, known that I was different and grew up in a predominantly white areas. I was born on Capitol Hill, and et cetera, and just moved into more suburban areas after that. And so I always knew I was different, but in my experience in the beginning, my parents did a very good job of shielding me, so it always felt like it was more like how much money you had. And I remember being in about 4th or 5th grade, and learning about the Japanese internment camps and being alarmed at the way they glossed over it. And me being like, wait, we have like 1 class for this, where we have to learn about the Holocaust, and this is no offense to the Holocaust, but we learn about the Holocaust for like an entire 2 months, you know, and this is like, we get like, is no one else, and I remember having that moment where you look around and you're like, is anyone else hearing this story? No adult had ever mentioned this before. Me just being horrified and being like, there's something wrong, and knowing in my gut that there was something wrong with that. And that never sat well with me. And I would talk about it just periodically growing up with people, 7th grade, 9th grade, and people either had no knowledge of it, as like almost like it didn't happen, or like didn't think it was that big of a deal, and just how sick to my stomach that made me. So that was when I realized there was something really wrong with this world. This country, but really the whole world, because this echoes everywhere, right? America is like a leader in how to behave and how to treat people. But then being in 6th grade wow, kids are crazy, right? Being in 6th grade and having a friend, we were sort of like, I went to this school that was like very international, and there were lots of children of ambassadors there. And we had I had a really good friend, Kate, whose parents were ambassadors of Russia. So she lived in the Russian embassy, or diplomats. I don't know if they're ambassadors, but they were diplomats. And my friend Mulan, who was from Mongolia, and she lived in the Mongolian embassy, and we would always go to their houses, and it was my friend Danae and myself who would go there. And Danae is also Black and a person of color, obviously, and she had been my best friend since 3rd grade, and we had 2 white friends, and it was like our little group, and we went on these little adventures. And my friend from Mongolia had a crush on a boy in school who used to yell at her and call her a flat face. And it was so mean. And it really, like, I remember really fighting the urge to smack him in the face, but he was just a kid, right? But that behavior was learned. And that behavior was learned. But that was also the year that I got called the N-word in Russian, right?
My God.
At the Russian embassy by a bunch of little boys who were mad that we were all there hanging out, right? It's just like, you begin to learn that you're different and there's something wrong, right?
Yeah.
And there's something wrong with that.
Meanwhile, you can't change how you look.
Oh my gosh, right?
It's like, if I could change it, then I would, but...
I mean, yeah. And I also just want to revise that I said her name is Mulan, but it was Kulan. Forgive me, Kulan.
I was gonna say Mulan, like the Disney
that's why I got stuck in my head, and I was like, wait a minute, no, Kulan Batbayar. Hey girl, she was really cool. And just sort of like having these experiences, and as when you're young, and we have to heal from that.
Totally.
Right? That's what brings us to wellness. We have to heal from that.
Totally. Yeah, I'm still healing from that, I think. No, I know I am, because I always felt like I didn't belong, and that I always had to also, like you were saying in the beginning, work 3 times as hard. I always had this type A, very controlling way about me where everything has to be perfect. I mean, I've eased on that a lot, but it has to be perfect because we can't just half-ass anything. Which is like funny because now in pop culture they call that being a Chad, like the mediocre white man. So good.
No offense to any Chads out there.
Or Kevin or Kyle.
I know all these personalities so well.
When I saw that on TikTok, I was like, oh my God, I love living in this age where everything has like
a name
and vocabulary now. But yeah, I'm still healing from that incredible imposter syndrome that I have all the time. 100%. But something that you were mentioning about learning in school, this is why it's so important for education, because there's so many very, very significant things that happened in our history that was never taught to us in school about Black history, which is American history, and about indigenous history that would just explain so much, like...
And teach compassion.
Yes, and empathy. And it's not until you take that upon yourself to learn about it and actually seek it out that you learn it. But the only reason why I'm interested in it is because, well, I'm interested in it, and because it's so important for me to understand like the history so that we don't repeat these mistakes going forward. It's
so funny you say that, because this is why you do the work.
Yes,
right?
I do.
Right, because there was so much work that was done to us to make us so narrow-minded or oppressed or whatever we were shaped and molded to be by the system that we live in, that like as adults we have to now undo it. So hopefully the future generations won't be doing this work, right? They won't be doing the work of undoing and unlearning in order to relearn. But that's what brought us here to what we've created. This is the work.
Yeah, the work. So what I'm going to ask you one of the questions that we ask our guests.
Mm-hmm.
What work do white people have to do, and what work do BIPOC people have to do?
I really love this question so much. So the white community at large has to be interested in constantly changing and evolving and growing, constantly learning and unlearning. They have to be willing to keep going even when they're fatigued. I understand that the fatigue of like social justice and that comes from trying to be a better person is real. And I also say, suck it up, like in the drill sergeant kind of way. And I think that's what we're not. Everyone's like, it's okay to rest. I actually disagree. I think that, yeah, you get like 10 minutes, right? But then you have to pick it back up because the rest of the world doesn't get to rest and hasn't rested forever. And while you rest, someone else is being shot for being gay. Someone else is being shot for being black. Someone else is being stabbed for being Asian, right? You get a hot second. Mm-hmm. We get to rest. Mm-hmm. This is our time to rest. So for people of color, for the BIPOC community, rest, but also let go. The anger that we carry and the trauma that we carry and the incredible amount of sadness and heaviness that we carry is weighing us down so that we're army crawling it through life. And for us, our work is letting go. That means letting go of some of the annoyance when you guys ask us dumb questions. You know? We have to be willing to explain it to you, because if we don't explain it to you, how will you know? Which is something else, which is what brings us here. How will you know? Another white person's going to tell you, and they're going to tell you wrong because it's not their experience. So we have to let go of all of those feelings of all of that. It doesn't mean that we have to be your teacher, but it means that we have to let go of some of the anger and sadness and frustration, because that's also holding us back.
Yeah.
And rest, take a nap. How do you feel?
I'm just laughing because I'm guessing your grace period is 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's about 10 minutes. Pull it together.
Well, I think for white people, I think one of the things that's going to be really hard for them to do is decentering themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Which
sorry, that was a good one. Such a good one.
Which requires a level of humbleness, and also, and I've spoken about this with some of my white friends who are a little bit more woke, you know, who have done the work, that, yeah, you're going to have to step aside. You're going to have to get off your platform. You're going to have to get off of your influence to some degree to give space to people of color. And again, we live in an abundant universe, so I don't say that as like you have to step down and never be seen again, but you have to also amplify people of color. And I think we're living in a world now where if you're not doing the work and people don't feel that or see that you're going to be left out. You are. Totally. And then for BIPOC people, I think going along the lines as you as well, but also finding the inner warrior within yourself to show up and do that self-work and know that you can be a leader and be the leader that you needed. Because oftentimes people of color are told to just like sit down and behave and don't show up and don't be seen and just put your head down and work. And I think it's our time.
I agree.
It is time.
It is time.
As Rafiki says.
I was like, what is that accent? It's Rafiki.
It's Rafiki.
You just reminded me of, and I won't go on a long tangent, but of an interaction I had where I was maybe one of two brown people on a Zoom call. It's not a community that I work with regularly, but I use their product. And someone asked a question about how to get, I think, like brand recognition so they can become ambassadors for brands. And I made a suggestion that I thought was very helpful, which is, I mean, I don't have to get into it, but other people gave very, what's the word? I don't want to say this in a negative way, but shallow and like self-oriented answers. And my response was, you have to be selfless if you want to be brand recognition. Like, for example, I work with Lululemon very closely, and one of the reasons why I've continued this relationship with them beyond my time is because I do actually care, and I want to make a change and affect a positive change in my community and the greater community. And that question was sort of like ignored, and the way it made me feel was like, as the only person of color in that space, there was one other person of color, but one of two other people of color in the space, very ignored. And I didn't speak after that. And at the end, my partner was like, he was in the room but not on the call, and he was like, were you bothered that they completely ignored your answer? Like, it was like very obvious. It was kind of like, okay, you know. And I mean, I don't even remember the interaction after that, but it was just, that's what I feel like it is to be a person of color in many spaces. It's like you are ignored. It's like you spoke and everyone kind of looks at you and either doesn't say anything at all or ignores what you have to say. And then if a white body says it, if a white voice says it, then it's some sort of revelation. And it's because I think
it's called white-splaining.
White-splaining.
Like mansplaining, but white-splaining.
Yes. And it's so harmful, and that's what holds us back from taking up spaces and understanding that we have so much power that it's I thank you for giving it a name.
I might have made it up.
No, but we're gonna call it that. It's official, new name. Done.
Oh my god. And then the last question, unless you had more, was what is your message for the world?
I want you to answer that first.
Ooh. I was listening to this podcast on the way up here. It's called Shattered Glass by Kristen Bell and Monica, which is a part of Dax Shepard's podcast. And I was telling you about that on the way up here. And they interviewed Oprah, and Oprah said something that I feel like we should all remember, is that we have a unique voice within us. We have something, a gift within us that needs to be expressed only through us. And so whatever that means for you, but for me specifically, I really do believe I came onto this earth to help other people of color, women of color, to be the leader, be the person that they always wanted growing up. And so I guess my message for the world is that you have something unique within you. Don't just think that you're just here plopped up into this world and meant to just comply and do boring shit for life, you know? I really think we're meant to be here to express our authenticity and what we truly love to do. And for each of us, it takes a different path and a different journey, but ultimately I do believe that we can. And so just don't give up on your dreams, whatever that might be.
Oh, I love that. Oh my gosh. I love that you're so wise. Like, I can't.
I'm 1,000 years old.
I was going to say, you should be the oldest person ever. No, I love that. And I love this idea of speaking to the you in the past, the you that needed you. That things to my heart. So my message for the world at large is that though at times it can feel so hopeless, right? It can feel like our greatest challenge is to overcome most likely the impossible dream, right? We can overcome white supremacy in little ways, but it is a very personal journey that it starts with us each individually. And we have to do that work. We have to show up for ourselves over and over again. I was listening to a podcast by Lewis Howes, I want to say he was. And he was interviewing Matthew McConaughey, who knew what Matthew McConaughey was so woke. Oh my God. Only the southern accent that like just gets me every time. Matthew. And he was saying that it's okay to be inherently selfish because one of the reasons that we continue to evolve is our selfishness. And so if you look at, he's a man who has a daughter, he wants women's rights and he wants women to have a seat at the table because he wants his daughter to have this. And the same is true for his friends who are of color, right? He wants them to be able to hold these spaces. in the same, and be welcome into the same places as he is, and be able to go and do the same things that he has had the privilege of doing. And it's okay to want the change for those selfish reasons, as long as we create the change. The change benefits all of us, right? It benefits all of us. And at the root of all of this is white supremacy. So if we can just
dig it up,
yeah. You know, put it through the shredder, set it on fire, and then do something else with it. Just get rid of it.
Well, the fact that we're sitting here talking about this and coming together and creating a project like this, and we are so excited for all of you to listen to all of the episodes with these amazing people who are doing this work and sharing their knowledge. It really gives me hope for our future. So thank you, Britt, for all of your wisdom and for co-creating this together. And thank you all for listening, and we're just so excited for you to listen to all of it.
Yeah, thank you. This is
thank you
from our hearts. Do the work, guys. Do the work.
Do the work.